Okay, hello and welcome everyone back to my YouTube channel. I know I haven't posted here for a very long time and hopefully that will change. I wanted to focus on someone that maybe you haven't read before. She is quite a prolific fantasy writer as far as I'm aware. I haven't read any of her other series, but I do own one of them. I picked them up at a charity store a long time ago. Haven't actually read them. There's Trudi Canavan. Trudi Canavan, and specifically The Magician's Guild. So this book was first published in 2001, so it's been around for quite a while. It might feel a little bit simple compared to some more complex fantasy books from nowadays, but I don't think that's a bad thing. So we have the initial trilogy, plus a prequel, plus then a trilogy to follow that. So there is a lot to get into. The place to start is between The Magician's Guild, which is book one of the original trilogy. It is probably the best one to start with. Let's get into what these books are about. So this is the first book of the Black Magician trilogy, and that has The Magician's Guild, The Novice, and The High Lord, as one can see there. And this is quite a nice copy of the book. Let's just take off this beaten up dust jacket so it doesn't get too beaten up. Really nice book. So for those who are into maps and being able to plot everything out on them, well, these stories have it. As you can see, there are multiple places that are going on, and this is just book one. The world does expand. Yeah, it takes place in the kingdom of Kyralia, and it tells the story of a young, poor girl named Sonea who suddenly demonstrates magic. And why that is significant is that in this world, only the most noble, powerful families have got magic. There is no poor person coming out of the blue with magic. It just doesn't make sense. And yet here she is. She is discovered to have magic. The first book tells the story of her trying to escape the clutches of the university or the Magician's Guild, who would like to have her for whatever reasons she is not aware of. She is quite the controversial figure in the world because she is a poor girl coming in with magical powers where that is practically unheard of, whether that be from her socio-economic standpoint or the fact that she's a girl. So the magic in this world, so it's quite a simple magic system. It's fairly fundamental, but it's not very complicated in that it's mostly a whole lot of force fields and magic missiles, and whoever has got the upper hand, whoever's got the strongest, the best technique, whoever can do more at once, can add enough power. Those are the main things that we're focusing on. So it's fairly simple, but it allows for the rest of the story to start taking place and roll out. So the magic is not, I'm not going to say it's not the focus, but there are many other focuses of the book. Another thing that it is definitely a coming of age story. So we definitely have this character, Sonea. She's on the edge of her childhood. She's lived on the streets for much of her life. She's got some friends, but they're all in the same place, sort of thing. So there was no real way that she could have ever imagined moving up from that standpoint. And then suddenly she has magic. And so with that comes danger, but also luxury, because magicians live in a fancy university with food and bedding and lessons and safety. But also she's an anomaly. It stays fairly core to what it is, very much on a socio-economic standpoint of the poor, how they are treated in this world, how the magicians align themselves to that, if or not, how the magicians behave in the peacekeeping that they do. They are basically the peacekeeping police whenever necessary, whenever there is a big ceremony or celebration. then the magicians are there as guards and soldiers, because it's such a defensive or more, it's more of a militaristic way of using magic, in that it's directly offensive or defensive. So it sticks to that quite a lot, and especially in the first book, where we see Sonea on this journey trying to escape the clutches of these magicians, and we see her perspective plus the perspective of from the magician's side. So we have an individual from their side. So we sort of get to understand the story from both sides and see where there is the miscommunications, where the intent is being shifted or is being lied about, all of those sorts of things. So I highly recommend it. And as I said, there are 3 books in this trilogy. I own the first 2. So the second one is The Novice. I'm not going to summarize The Novice quite yet, even though I've very briefly touched on what's in the first book. This is more of an overview to just recommend something maybe you haven't read. These are great fantasy books. The author, Trudi Canavan, is quite well known. She was publishing in like the early 2000s. That's at least when these books came out. She's based in Australia, so that gives her a bit of a different background perspective where she's writing from. Not that these are Australian necessarily in their theming, but certainly it's great to have a little bit of a different perspective instead of just English and American writers. Not that I've got anything against, but yeah, it's great to have a bit more variety in there. I read these initially as a teenager. They were sort of like a huge fad amongst me and my friends. One friend owned one book, the other owned the other, and so there was a constant swap. That's why I have such a strange variety of the books. It doesn't really make sense. It's very hard for me to read them currently. Last time I did a reread, which I think was about a year ago, I read them digitally. Just that's much easier these days. There are definitely things that I will look out for in secondhand bookstores to try and find them. I mean, that's where I found the vast majority of them, as well as then the other books of Trudi Canavan's that I own. I haven't read them, so I'm not going to necessarily recommend them as of yet, but we'll see if I get to them. They've been sitting on my shelf for a very, very long time. So one of the main inciting incidents in this story is when the current state of affairs in the city possibly at its worst looking moment. And that is where every year the dwells, all of the people who live in the slums are cleared out every year just before winter by the magicians. It's not great. They're sort of left to fend for themselves, and maybe they might make it back into the city over the next few months, but most of them are going to die, and this is a yearly thing. So as I mentioned, there is a split point of view in this book. We majoritively follow Sonea, our young protagonist, in her journey running away from her pursuers and learning this strange new magic that she has, because she hadn't practiced it before. She didn't know she had it until this very inciting that sets the ball rolling for the story. So the point of view is then split, where we follow the lords Rothan and Daniel as they are battling it out in the Magicians Guild. There's a bit of like politicking that goes on within the guild. There are some free radicals. There's the High Lord, like ruler of the space, and the first book is very much around this conflict around who will be her mentor if they manage to capture her and bring her under control, because that is the concern for the Magicians Guild, is that untrained, she is a danger to herself and others. Whether she means to be or not, magic can be quite untamed and is very much tied to one's emotions. So if she's uncontrolled, she could cause a lot of damage and not even mean to do it. There is a point of goodness in the pursuit of Sonea, trying to find her, and there's definitely a back and forth as to, well, she didn't ask for this, she just wants to live in peace, she just wants to go back home. She can't, because she's being pursued on all sides, not just by the magicians, but there is also the Thieves Guild, who would very much like a rogue magician on their side. So she's torn between all of these different forces. She doesn't know quite what's going on. She has a young friend who is trying to help her out from her old life. She also gets to see if the grass is greener on the other side. So that is more or less the first book. I highly recommend going ahead and reading them. Give them a go. They are quite refreshing in that they're quite action-packed. The magic is not like overly complex, and yet it makes sense. It's a solid system. The world as well, especially when you start going into the history of the world, that's very much where the prequel comes into play, because it happens like hundreds of years before the first trilogy. So you kind of get to see the history of what's going on with Sachaka, the neighboring peoples. That then gets explored later on in books 2 and 3 in the Black Magician series. I would highly recommend making the prequel part of your reading, because it really fills in a lot of gaps, and especially world building wise. Not to say the world building is weak. It's more of a good thing in that you're not being overwhelmed. These are very well constructed stories. So you're not sort of getting dumped with information all the time. It's well filtered through the eyes of Sonea and how she's coming to understand things, or how the magicians understand things. But yeah, I highly recommend, give them a go. If you want, they're good books. I've read them a couple times. While there is romance in them, it doesn't really, it's not very spicy. So if anybody's like afraid of that, or you want a bit of a cleanse from all of them spicy fantasy books, and just get straight down to some good protagonist fixing the world, then yeah, these are a good pick. And they read fairly quickly. The language is simple and it flows well. So these books are a little bit on the long side. Their first book is, let's have a look. "465 pages, so it's on the long side, but it's certainly not the worst that one has seen. Plus, extra pages, slang in the world, glossary, for all of those who would very much like. So there's a lot there. And I think you should take a look. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.